I'm Colleen Taylor, and I've been a writer and editor for the past 10 years with GigaOM and TechCrunch, and most recently Y Combinator. And I'm so excited to be introducing Susan Lyne here, who is the founder and president of BBG Ventures, based in New York City, a really standout investment firm. But Susan has been leading BBG Ventures for the past 2 years. But before that, just to give you a little bit of an idea of who Susan is, I just want to embarrass you a little bit by going through your CV, because it's really phenomenal. This is a woman who's been the managing editor of The Village Voice, founded and was the editor-in-chief of Premiere Magazine, then went on to be an executive at Walt Disney for many years, where you were the president of ABC, then went on to be the president and CEO of Martha Stewart, Omni Media, then the CEO of Gilt Group, and the CEO of AOL Brand Group, where you were actually my boss's boss for a period of time while I was at TechCrunch. So that's just a really stellar resume. And just to get started here, to get an idea of who you are really, is there a common thread that sort of motivated you throughout when you look back at everything you've done? What has been your motivation?
I think it's always easier looking back over your career to see threads. At the time, I will say, at least for the first half of my career, I sort of reacted to things as opposed to driving my own destiny. But when I started working, it was the mid-'70s, so there was no digital world. I wanted to have an impact. I knew I wanted to work in a creative business. And in that era, that meant magazines. That's where the conversation was taking place. And I probably read 30 magazines a month. I consumed them. And so did everybody I knew. It was how we stayed current. It was absolutely how you had an impact socially, culturally, politically. You did it through magazines.
Right.
And so that was my start. And from there, I sort of moved into other, what I consider creative businesses, television, and then Gilt, which was in its own way, even though it was e-commerce, it was also entertainment. So there are definitely through lines there. I would say the other through line is that I have always programmed for a female consumer first and foremost.
Yeah. And I want to get into BBG, because that's really exciting. Yeah. But one more thing about this larger picture. How have you kind of maintained both a creative edge when you talk about being in a creative industry, while also you're in these institutions, these corporations, which really aren't famed for being very creative? How have you kind of stayed ahead of that? Because I feel like you've always kind of kept very not what people would think of as a corporate suit.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that exactly, except that I've always surrounded myself with people who I thought were incredibly talented and were deeply creative. So yes, you always have bosses who are more financially motivated.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the way you are going to build a lasting brand and a lasting business is if what you're putting out there is unique and is engaging enough that people want to come back to it over and over again. And that means really focusing less on the money. The money will come, but you got to get the product right.
Yeah. And BBG Ventures. 2-year anniversary now, just this month, right?
2-year anniversary,
Happy
yes.
birthday.
Thank you.
For anyone in the audience who doesn't know what BBG is, can you tell us?
Yeah, we are a venture fund, early stage venture fund. We invest in what we call technology startups with at least one female founder. But we define technology very broadly. So these are not necessarily software and hardware companies. Many of them are consumer products or consumer services companies. But it really came out of observing multiple things happening. One was that we were seeing young women were increasingly the early adopters of new products. I think there's still this image that the early adopter is the Engadget boy. But if you look at things like Snapchat or Musical.ly or Prisma or or anything you do with your mobile phone, women are first in, and they are far more engaged. On top of that, we were seeing a slew of women starting companies. And I think that's partly because technology has advanced enough that you don't have to be a back-end engineer to get something out to market and see whether there's market fit. So, you can actually start a company for hundreds of thousands of dollars now instead of millions of dollars, and test it. So we were anecdotally seeing a ton of young women who were building companies, were based back in New York, and at the same time, the legacy VC world was sort of ignoring it. When we started, women were getting 6 or 7% of all the venture capital funding. Now I think it's between 10 and 12%. It's still a ridiculously low number, but in our mind, it was a huge opportunity. If we could invest in the best of these female founders who know this end user really well, because she is that end user, then we had a chance to really develop a different kind of competitive advantage.
Right.
So we've been doing this for 2 years. We've seen almost 1,200 companies. So the idea that there aren't enough women starting companies and that's why venture capital can't invest in women is bullshit.
They just say, I don't know where to find them. I don't know.
Right. I'd love to
women.
invest in more women, but they're just not starting companies. I don't know how many times I heard that. It's not true. And we've invested in 38. So it's a really interesting range of companies. We invest around certain themes, but we always break our own rules too when we see a company that we think is really unique and has a great founder.
Great. And is there something different about your approach, do you think? How do you find these companies? What is your search like? So
most of the time they find us. You would not be surprised to hear that, if you're a founder and you've started a company, you do a lot of research and you try and find the VCs who might be more interested in what you're doing. So a lot of them come to us through our personal networks. And I obviously have a long history in media companies, commerce, and my partner comes out of Bain Consulting, and she's a lawyer, and additionally she ran AOL's millennial site, so deep into sort of the Gen Z millennial world as well. So between the two of us, we get a lot of people from our personal networks and our professional networks who send us startups. You told me about one while we were waiting in the green room.
Yeah.
And we get others from VCs. We have a lot of good friends in the VC world, and when they see a good female founder, they will definitely give us a call. And we go to things like this. So we're proactive too about getting out and seeing what's happening on the ground.
Right. And you had mentioned this morning when we were talking that you had like 6 or 7 investments here in Los Angeles.
We do.
So it sounds like you guys are really all over the place. You're not just, even though you're based in New York.
Yeah.
What does your geographic footprint look like? And is there a difference when you're looking for, female-led companies or female co-founders? Do they tend to be not necessarily always in that Silicon Valley landscape or New York City?
Yeah, I would say, look, we are a very small group. We are 2 partners and 1 associate, so there's only so many places we can cover. But of the 38 companies, half of them are in New York. The other half are pretty evenly split between Southern California and Northern California. And we just made our first investment in Las Vegas, believe it or not, which is a tech-heavy company that wants to be the Twilio for drones. So, it's outside of what we typically invest in, but it was a killer team. And seeing a woman who was running a very, very interesting and ultimately complex engineering team in a new market, who had a pretty good sense of what was going to be needed, we thought, why not?
What other trends are you kind of seeing in the marketplace? You've been doing this now for 2 years full time.
Yeah.
What's happening? Are there things that are kind of that you're over now, or things that are really exciting now going into 2017?
I think, well, I'll talk about a couple of things. We invest very carefully in media, even though that's my background. I think that there's so much commodity content out there that we've been less focused on that than I think we might have been. We really look for unique content for high-value consumers. If a company like The Mighty had a female founder, I'd be all over that.
Yeah.
We've invested in a company here in LA called Beautycon that has a very interesting sort of flywheel. They do beauty conferences for Gen Z girls. They get 10,000, 12,000, 14,000 girls who show up to see YouTube stars and to test out all kinds of beauty products. And on top of that, they also have a website that is devoted to beauty stuff. Yeah. But it's really for a multicultural girl who thinks about makeup in a whole different way and thinks about beauty in a whole different way. So I think they have a unique voice. They're clearly speaking to an audience that is very hard to reach. When you go to one of these conferences, it's kind of stunning to see that many girls who are paying serious money, $30 to about $180 to spend the day. Now, they're obviously not spending their own money, they're spending mom's money, but they are doing it, and they are spending the entire day there. So it's a highly engaged community, and that's interesting to us. We've invested in what I call sort of new commerce, and that takes multiple forms. We're really looking for commerce that Amazon can't do or Amazon won't do. So we've invested in a few subscription companies. We've invested in a few companies that are using data to really personalize the commerce experience. So that's another area that we are very focused on. We're interested in sort of the evolution of home and family. We invested in a company called Hop Skip Drive that's here in Los Angeles that's doing ride sharing for kids. So a lot of people are not going to put their 7 and 8 and 9-year-olds into an Uber, and yet they've got 2 working parents and they need to get their kids, and maybe it's 2 kids or 3 kids who are going different places after school. The company was started by 3 working mothers who really needed this themselves, and that's where this thesis of, if you find great female founders who are solving a problem that they themselves have, and they know there are a lot of other people out there like them, those tend to be some of the most interesting companies for us.
Yeah.
We're investing too in sort of the evolution of work. By 2020, 60 million Americans will be freelance, will be self-employed. And so finding the tools for those people. Another company here in LA we invested in is called STEM. And they built a platform that was initially built for independent musicians and sort of YouTube stars to be able to track their payments, because otherwise they didn't know they're on multiple platforms, from Spotify to YouTube to the Apple Store, and this allows them to see real-time what they should be getting from each of these different platforms, and they also collect it, and it's all built on blockchain. So very, I think, adaptable to other sectors as well over time. So tools and also different ways for this kind of new workforce to adapt.
Right.
So those are some of the themes we focus on, not all of them. We do a fair amount with IoT as well. And then there are always companies that don't fall into a category, but as I said, are doing something unique that we think is really interesting and could be really valuable.
Right. One thing you hear a lot about different investors is that they kind of like follow the herd. And what's interesting about BBG is that from the very beginning, you're founded on not following the herd.
Yeah.
You're like looking for things that maybe other people aren't seeing, and then because you want to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's you're looking to be the one who's making money because other people haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I wanted to ask also for people in the room who are looking to raise money, are there what's the fundraising environment like?
I think there's still a lot of money out there for seed stage companies. There are many what are called micro funds that have been set up in the last 5-7 years, and they have to put that money to work. So I think that even though I do not know a founder who has not had to go to 20, 30 different pitches before they finally find someone who's going to lead their round. You end up kissing a lot of frogs before you find the one. But I think where it's gotten significantly tighter is at Series A. And one thing I would say to all of you who are somewhere between seed stage and Series A is make sure you understand what it's going to take for you to be able to raise your Series A. So the numbers we heard when we were starting, which was, if you had $100,000 a month of recurring revenue, you could raise a Series A. Now I think it's at least double that, and in some cases I'm hearing more than that.
Wow.
So it's definitely a tougher world out there, but spend some real time talking to people who are either your investors now or people who are in that world to find out what you're going to be measured on, what those metrics are that you are going to have to hit, and make sure that you have a path to that in the time you have left. So I'm sure you all look at what your runway is every week. But make sure that you are setting goals for yourself on even a monthly basis about what you have to do to get to that next round. And if it turns out that you don't think you're going to hit that, then think about what you could do to raise a bridge. And if you do raise a bridge, know that then you really have to hit those numbers. Because that's what you're going to be promising the people who are putting up money at that bridge stage.
And we're almost out of time, but I still have one last question I want to ask you. For anyone out here who's kind of thinking maybe about making a move, through your career, you've kind of been in so many interesting places at so many interesting times. Mm-hmm. How have you known when it was time to do something new?
Yeah. I will say a couple of things. One is that we all go through moments, weeks, months, where you think, I hate my job, or I hate what I'm doing right now. And then it lifts and something happens and you realize, I don't really hate it, I just didn't like what was going on at that moment. But there are other times where you're done with this. You've learned what you can, and it's really time to do something different. And I think over time, you get better at knowing what the difference is. So I got pretty good at realizing that it was time for me to move on, and I did.
Yeah. That's the key. You have to. No one's going to make those kind of decisions for you.
No, exactly. And it's hard sometimes. I will also say, Colleen and I were talking for a minute before we came out about taking time off. And I got fired from one of my jobs, a job I loved. I was the president of entertainment at ABC, which means president of primetime. So I was developing and putting together the primetime schedule, and it was a very cool job. I loved it. And we were in 4th place, and I got replaced 2 weeks before the upfronts in 2004. It was the first time in my life, literally since I was in college, that I had time off. And it turned out to be incredibly useful because it was time for me to really look at what was happening out in the world, what was different. And it's when I started thinking about, okay, I need to get smarter about digital. This world is changing. It's not an analog world anymore. And it's when I realized that I really wanted to be a CEO. I wanted to run a company, and that's when I went to the Martha Stewart Company. But sometimes having some time off between things can be incredibly valuable.
Well, Susan Lyne, thank you so much. Thank you.